Now, the theme that the Salvation Army has chosen for this Human Trafficking Sunday is "We Will Not Be Silent." And again, I tried to explain it to the kids, and I'll try to explain it to you this morning if you guys are not exactly sure of what it is. Human trafficking involves the recruitment and transportation of persons using deception, coercion, and threats in order to place and keep them in a situation of forced labor, slavery, or servitude. Persons are trafficked into a variety of sectors of the informal economy, including prostitution, domestic work, agricultural, the garment industry, or street begging. Did you know that the majority of people trafficked are women and girls? The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime reports that 66% of victims are women, 13% girls, 9% boys, and 12% men. Trafficking is the third largest grossing sector of organized crime after drugs and arms. They estimate profits of $31.6 billion US. The U.S. Department of State estimates that there are at least 800,000 people trafficked across borders annually, the majority being women trafficked for commercial sexual exploitation. This does not account for the estimated millions who are trafficked within their own country. What about Canada? The RCMP estimate that 600 to 800 persons are trafficked in Canada annually, predominantly for sexual purposes. An additional 1,500 to 2,200 persons are trafficked through Canada into the United States. Girls as young as 12 are trafficked in Canada for sexual purposes. There is no reliable data on the number of persons trafficked within Canada itself, but according to one report, Aboriginal women are excessively affected. And this report was by the Standing Committee on Status of Women. Canada is believed to be a transit and a destination country in the international trafficking of persons. Victims may enter Canada through both legal and illegal means using genuine or falsified documents. Once in Canada, intelligence shows that trafficking victims are predominantly forced to work in the sex trade. Here's a breakdown of how these 2.44 million people who are trafficked, this is what the industry they end up into. 43% of those trafficked ended up into sexual exploitation. 32% labor exploitation. 25% a mixture of both. And 1.2 million were minors. These are some big numbers. I didn't realize that in my own self, the numbers of people who are trafficked in Canada, the United States, and around the world. As we look into our text this morning, we see the question of where is God? And why does he stand afar off? Now, commentaries believe that it presents as fearful a picture of human wickedness as any contained in the Word of God. It sets before us pride, persecution, boasting, ridicule, denial of foresight, hardness, scorn, evil speaking, defying and denying of God, oppression and crushing the poor, a glorying in deeds of shame and expected impurity therein. And what is more trying still is that God seems to let this all go and keep silence, and stands afar off and hides himself in trouble. So the psalmist says. Verse 1, the psalmist writes, wonders why God is standing afar off in the distance during our time of trouble. We are not sure that what the circumstances were when the psalmist wrote this passage, nor do we know who wrote this passage. This psalm seems to be written at a time when the author felt some distance between himself and God during some time of trial in his life. Again, Psalms 10:1 says, "Why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble?" This has been a question that we ask often. I'm pretty sure that almost everybody at some point in time, in those darkest, frightening alone moments, have asked, "Where is God?" The psalm seems like a good one for the present situation in which we deal with, because according to the verse 2, the problem the writer is facing seems to be caused by some wicked enemy who is pursuing the author and causing him the trouble. Isn't that what happens in our daily society? We have an evil force, an evil creature, whatever you want to call the devil, and he's roaming around in our society, and he's trying to pursue the innocent. He's trying to drag them into his clutches, his forces, doing what he wants them to do, not what God created us to do. Even those who we consider to be righteous in the Bible question God about things that were happening or were to happen in their lives. In Genesis 18, Sarah questions God about the promise of a son. Not only did she question about this, she also laughed at God. Did she not? Job, all throughout the book, questioned God about the circumstances that he was facing. And if you remember his wife, she told him to curse God and die. Job 2:9. Moses, that great man of God who led the Israelites out of bondage, questions God about the abilities to lead his people out of slavery. Exodus 3:1 says, "But Moses said to God, 'Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?'" We all question God. It's not wrong to question God sometimes. But what is wrong is to question without waiting for the answer. We sometimes wonder why God allows the things to happen that are happening in our society today. Why is there so much hurting in the world? Why is there so much sickness? Why do young people die so young? Why is there so much evil in the world? And the list of questions go on. But we, like the psalmist who wrote this passage, are trying to grasp and understand why the wicked seem to prosper. The psalmist writes that the wicked man hunt down the weak. They boast about the cravings of his heart. Has no room for God. His ways are always prosperous. He believes nothing will shake him. His mouth is full of curses and lies. From ambush he murders the innocent. He lies in wait to catch the helpless. He believes to himself that God has forgotten. You see, these people have arrogance about them. They think that they are unstoppable by man. But even greater than man, they believe that even God, the God of the universe, is unable to stop them. This is what has happened with human trafficking. These evildoers believe that the crime they are committing has gone unnoticed by man. And for many years, there has been silence. Oftentimes, because it doesn't affect us personally, we feel it is not our fight. But we must not be silenced. We must speak out about such injustice. We need to bring awareness to others so that these innocent girls and boys, women and men, who are taken from their normal lives and sold into lives of hardships don't have to go without being recognized. We must be the voice of those who are unable to speak for themselves. Here are some of the examples of lives that are affected by human trafficking. There was a family that needed money for food and medical expenses, but they were poor, so they went to a local money lender. The money lender gave them 1,500 rupees in exchange for their 10-year-old son. This young boy is forced to work and is only given food when his master wants to feed him. A young girl was promised work in a town away from her mother and father. While on the way, she was taken by the people who promised her work and was placed in a brothel and beaten for 3 days until she consented to service. Paying customers. She had to service up to 30 customers per day. These families must have asked these same questions as did the writer of the Psalms. In the midst of their vulnerability and they were mistreated. They were overpowered and taken advantage of because of their situation in life. These stories were taken from articles, but we do not have to look far to find the evidence of this crime even in our own country. There are people who have been affected by human trafficking in many of our major centres in Canada. I remember last year in Winnipeg, and it's only, I guess, in Winnipeg that we first heard about this as prominent as what we did, but amongst the Aboriginal women, very prominent that these women are taken, mistreated, because of their situation in life. They're vulnerable. So people play on that vulnerability. They take them away from what's normal for them and bring them to these places and force them to do things that they don't want to do. These stories can be read on the local news channels, websites, if you want to read them. I read some of them this week, and some of them are awful scary. There are some people who find themselves able to get out of that lifestyle, but there's only a window when they can get out, and they jump at that window. Some have had opportunity to escape the lifestyle, and they change their lives for good. The psalmist asks God to take action. We read in Psalms 10, 12 to 15, "Arise, Lord, lift up your hand, O God. Do not forget the helpless. Why does the wicked man revile God? Why does he still say to himself, he won't call me to account? But you, God, see the trouble of the afflicted." Does he not? You consider their grief and take them in hand. The victims commit themselves to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked man. Call the evildoer to account for his wickedness, that would not otherwise be found out. You see that the action the psalmist is asking God for is that he would call the wicked to account for their actions. The psalmist has seen the injustice that has been done to those who he makes mention of in verse 2 to 11. He wishes that these evil people are punished for their actions. That is why the Salvation Army has set aside this day to bring attention to that things that are happening in our society that often we turn a blind eye to. We hear very little about this in the local news sometimes. It seems to be more of an international issue than an issue that affects Canadians, even less when you think about our small island of Newfoundland. We don't hear a lot about that in our province, but I'm pretty certain that we're no exception to the rule. In the past, I've often observed that those who do not seem to play by the rules often prosper, and they get ahead, while those who play by the rules seem to struggle just to live. However, that is only what the devil would like us to believe. The psalmist addresses this thought in Psalm 73 and 3, where he writes, "For I invade the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked." I love that what Matthew Henry commentaries writes about this verse. He says the psalmist was strongly tempted to envy the prosperity of the wicked. A common temptation. Do we not sometimes look at our friend or neighbor and say, well, they've got this, they got that. Are they doing it honestly? Are they doing it dishonestly? We always look at what they have sometimes, and we want what they have. And then we wonder why they prosper when they're not doing it honestly. Matthew Henry says it's a common temptation, which has tried the graces of many saints. But he lays down the great principle by which he resolved to abide. It is the goodness of God. This is the truth which cannot be shaken. Good thoughts of God will fortify against Satan's temptations. The faith even of strong believers may be sorely shaken and ready to fall. There are storms that will try the firmest anchors. Foolish and wicked people have sometimes a great shore of outward prosperity. They seem to have the least share of troubles of this life, and they seem to have the greatest share of discomforts. They live without the fear of God, yet they prosper and get on in the world. Wicked men often spend their lives without much sickness, and end them without great pain, while many godly persons scarcely know what health is, and die with great sufferings. Often the wicked are not frightened either by the remembrance of their sins or the prospect of their misery, but they die without terror. I believe that those who do wicked may not always pay for their evil actions here below, but when they come before God at the end of the age, they will be called to account for their actions. You see, we may not be physically able to stop these things from happening, but I believe that there is a God who cares and hears the cries of his people, and we need to be in prayer for those who find themselves affected by those who are involved in the actions of human trafficking, those who are victims of this crime. When the psalmist asks that God would break the arm of the wicked and evil men, the psalmist is asking that God would take away the power of these men, the power that they have over their victims, and help them them to once again fear God and show reverence to His holiness and sovereignty. I love it that the psalmist does not leave this lament without answering the question that he asks in verse 1, why? You see, the psalmist has proven the faithfulness of God in the past, and he knows that He will be faithful to those who are oppressed as well. We read in verse 16 and 18, the Lord is king forever and ever. The nations will perish from His land. You, Lord, hear the desire of the afflicted. You encourage them, you listen to the cry, defending the fatherless and the oppressed, so that mere earthly mortals will never again strike terror. I am so grateful that we can find comfort in this psalm. We go through the whole chapter with this psalm, believing that God has forsaken the oppressed and afflicted. The psalmist states that the wicked has no fear of God, and that they believe that God has turned a blind eye to their deeds. But here in this verse, we see that God has not forsaken the oppressed and afflicted, nor has God turned a blind eye to the deeds of the wicked. God is a God of love, and He sees everything that happens to us as children. As for the wicked, we know that God is in control of everything that happens. Scripture tells us in Micah 2, 1-3, woe to those who plan iniquity, to those who plot evil on their beds at morning's light and carry it out, because it is their power to do it. They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them. They defraud people of their homes. They rob them of their inheritance. Therefore, the Lord says, I am planning disaster against this people, from which they cannot save themselves. You will no longer walk proudly, for it will be a time of calamity. Again, we read in Psalms 146, 7-9, the psalmist affirms that God cares for those who are oppressed. He writes, He upholds the cause of the oppressed and gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up those who bow down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the foreigner and sustains the fatherless and the widow, but He frustrates the ways of the wicked. Today we can be assured that God sees the crimes that may be hidden from our sights. Those who are taken from their parents, their homes, their children, their families. They may feel that no one cares, but we know that today God cares for them. And we know that those who take part in human trafficking will one day answer to God for what they have done and are doing. Here's the question that you may be asking this morning. What does this have to do with me? The answer is that we need to uplift those people that are affected by human trafficking in prayer. We need to pray for safety and protection for the victims of human trafficking. But we also need to pray for the oppressors of human trafficking. That they would have a change of heart. They would turn from their wicked ways to a God of love and compassion. See, God cares. God expects us, His children, to care. This morning you've probably noticed that there's 3 pictures here at the front. Pictures say we will not be silent. We may not physically be able to go out and fight these battles, but we can bring our prayer petitions this morning to a God who cares, a God who understands. They're innocent children. So I was writing this 12 years old, the age of my daughter. Taken from their home, taken from their parents, forced to do things that they should never be forced to do. They are the innocent. There are women that are forced to do unimaginable things. And yet people click on their internets and they look at these photos, they look at videos, they look at all these things that are not of God. We need to be accountable for the things that are happening in our society. We need to be speaking out. We've become too quiet. We're too comfortable to sit in these pews and not take action. So today we need to take action. If we can't take it by physically going out and stopping these things, we need to pray to a God who's ever present, that He would watch over those who are victims of human trafficking, that He will watch over those who do human trafficking. God still loves them. He died for them. God still cares. So this morning, I want you to, as a congregation, come forward and pray for these people who are affected either by those who've been trafficked or those who are trafficking. It's big business. The statistics are there. It's big business. But it's wrong this morning.